Welcome to The Final Cut, the show where film and television meet expert insight and passionate discussion. Hosted by Professor John Cook, Emeritus Professor of Media, Film and Television at Glasgow Caledonian University, and Charlotte Buren, amateur filmmaker and devoted cinephile, The Final Cut brings fresh perspectives to everything on screen. Each episode explores the latest releases, iconic classics, and the trends shaping the world of storytelling through spirited debate, academic depth, and a shared love for the art of film and television. Whether you're a seasoned critic or just here for the drama, this is your place for screen talk that cuts deeper. This is The Final Cut.
Welcome to Final Cut, the show that's going to talk about the latest in cinema and television. And I'm delighted to introduce my co-host, which is Professor John Cook, who is Emeritus Professor from Glasgow Caledonian, who has a strong background in Doctor Who and modern British cinema. And I'm Charlotte Buren. I'm an avid film lover and have done a couple of short films. So to start today, we're going to talk about the latest episode of Doctor Who, which is the Robot Revolution. And however, I want to start a bit. So how come you're interested in Doctor Who, and what's your background on working on Doctor Who?
Well, thanks, Charlotte, for inviting me along to this. I've always been interested in Doctor Who since I was about the age of 5. So I grew up in the 1970s, so my doctors were John Pertwee and Tom Baker. Like a lot of people, I sort of lost interest in the 1980s, but have sort of renewed my interest since 2005 and what's called the launch of New Who, as it's called. Now, I've got a few claims to fame in terms of academic work on Doctor Who. I actually interviewed Sidney Newman, who was the co-creator of Doctor Who way back in 1963. Years ago for my PhD, I actually interviewed him. I interviewed him about other issues to do with British television drama history. But being a Doctor Who fan, I couldn't resist asking a few questions on Doctor Who. I wonder what he would make of the modern version of Doctor Who. I've also published on Doctor Who, in fact, in a book called Doctor Who and Adventures in Space and Time, a Reader, you will find a chapter from me on the Doctor Who and the Daleks films. And that was just reissued. It was an old essay that was republished, and it was issued just a couple of years ago.
Sounds great. And obviously we were delighted this Saturday when the first episode came out and we saw our heroine being kidnapped by these giant robot. However, what was your impression of the Robot Revolution?
I enjoyed it. I thought it was light and airy. Now, it fits very much into a pattern that Russell T Davies, the showrunner of Doctor Who, has established, which is to go for big, bright, breezy episodes that are designed, at least in theory, to bring the mass audience in, not to have anything too dark as the first season opener. Now, whether in today's world, and this is an interesting question we could explore, whether in today's world of streaming and so many different choices that we have for media, whether that strategy still holds and is successful or not is maybe something we could discuss here. But in terms of the episode, it was a classic season opener. The key job of that episode, in terms of the showrunner, Russell T Davies, was to introduce the new companion. And it's clear that the new companion, played by Virada Sethu, Belinda Chandra, the character, is designed very much in the mold of previous companions, such as the character played by Catherine Tate, who faced off with David Tennant in 2008. Not to be a sycophant of the Doctor, not to be somebody who just says, "Oh, Doctor, I love what you do," but instead to be antagonistic and to actually challenge the Doctor. So that was the job of the episode. It worked fairly well. A few reservations that maybe we can discuss as the podcast goes on.
Yes. And how do you find with the role of Dr. Noah, how now been taken over by Ncuti Gatwa, how do you feel his take on the Doctor in comparison to the previous Doctors? How does he compare?
Well, I won't start doing a contest where we rate each actor and the qualities each actor brings, because in many ways, Doctor Who is an actor-proof role. There hasn't actually been an actor who's failed in the role, as far as I can tell. They've maybe had their criticisms from fans over the years. In some ways, the role of Doctor Who is actor-proof. As long as they breathe, have a pulse and an equity card, they can do it. But what Ncuti Gatwa brings very much, I think, compared to this characterization of previous incarnations of the Doctor, is he's much more touchy-feely, if you like.
Mm.
He's much more trying to be appeal to the generation that have grown up since the turn of the millennium. Very
In what
much
way do you
about,
think he does that?
well, the fact he cries just about every
Mm.
episode. There seems to be, maybe it's written into his contract or something, that every episode there must be a tear. And usually it's a single tear that streaks down the face. In this episode, The Robot Revolution, it was when a character called Sasha is killed.
Mm.
But the interesting thing for the audience is the audience had only just met this character, Sasha, whereas supposedly within the story, the Doctor had spent 6 months with her, living on this planet before Belinda arrives. So in many ways, the emotional gut punch for the audience wasn't there because, oh, this is a character we've just seen. Oh, sorry, she's
Yeah.
dead. But you see Ncuti Gatwa's incarnation of the Doctor crying, and that seems to happen a lot in the new iteration.
Mm.
Much more full of energy. It's much more a Doctor who is very much probably the youngest in terms of energy and the excitement, almost like a child, and wearing different costumes as well. Every week he wears a different costume, but sort of trying up the dressing up box.
Perhaps
This
a
is
bit more
quite different
theatrical.
from previous Doctors.
And also this episode, of course, introduced us to our heroine Belinda Chandra, and she also becomes the companion. So what stood out about her character, and how do you think, how is she in this compared to other characters, other companions in the past, and maybe her acting? How did you feel?
Well, she's a direct contrast, obviously, to Ruby Sunday, played by Millie Gibson, the character who was introduced in the new Disneyfied season one. They've changed the names of the seasons
Mm.
around over the years, but this is now called season one of a rebooted Doctor Who. And in many ways, the Millie Gibson character, Ruby Sunday, was in the line of companions stretching back to Rose, played by Billie Piper. So a companion who's almost in love with the Doctor. In this case, not romantically linked or anything like
Yeah.
that, but certainly in awe of him. Whereas what we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, is that the new character, Belinda Chandra, is in the iteration of Donna Noble, played by Catherine Tate, a character who's stuck in the TARDIS and maybe doesn't really want to be there. And the
Mm.
story arc of this season is the idea that she's looking for a way home, but she's having to
Mm.
go the long way round because, for some reason, no doubt to be explained to us in later episodes, the TARDIS can't bring her back to the exact date in which she left Earth. So she's very much within strain. I wonder, though, in terms of the delivery of the lines, I don't think she's as strong a protagonist as Catherine Tate, Donna Noble was in giving back chat to the Doctor. And I noticed a couple of critics online were saying, well, it's slightly subtle the way that she undermines him. So when he talks about why me, she responds back, do you think I'm six?
Yeah.
But she does it in terms of the acting style in quite an understated way.
Mm.
And I don't know enough about Varada Sethu's work as an actress to pass comment on her overall abilities, but I did wonder whether she's able to deliver a killer line in the same way as Catherine Tate clearly did
Yeah.
in the Donna Noble role.
I
So,
must say,
we have to see. The jury's out.
I was very impressed by the lady who played Sasha 55. I thought she did a very good job, particularly when she welcomed her to the planet and so on. It's a shame she had a very short time on the show, but I think she did a. But I was impressed by Belinda as well. I loved the way she could go from someone who saw the star certificates as a bit of a joke and suddenly be the queen of this new planet. And I also think it was quite funny, just the way they did it, because of course, of the way we perceive these certificates to be maybe nothing, and then this is transformed. And I think that is maybe a thing that has been used quite a lot in literature. I don't know in Doctor Who, but this idea of things that looks unreal suddenly becomes real. And how did you take that as a plot point?
Yeah, no, that actually is a great idea. I think the premise of the
Mm.
episode is a great one. The idea that we have heard about this. Oh, you can buy a certificate and name a star after you. And it's often regarded as quite a sort of cheap gift, maybe not cheap in economic cost, but in terms of you hand someone a certificate as a present, and it's okay, they might have preferred an iPhone or something rather than a certificate. But nevertheless, it's a great premise, but it is very much in the tradition of what fantasy and Doctor Who's really fantasy rather than science fiction these days, which is the idea that you take something of the now and then you make it unreal and you spin a sort of what if premise. So in this case, what if it was taken literally that in fact she owned this planet and that in fact she was the queen of it?
The other thing that it talks about is this idea of AI control and themes of emotion and manipulation. Obviously, AI is something that's very interesting. Do you think that it almost plays on people's fear of the AI is taking over, and when they get sentient, then they will take over the planets, etc.? Do you think that metaphor landed?
Yeah, that metaphor landed. Russell T Davies, the writer of this episode, again wanting very much make Doctor Who relevant to the now and to what people are concerned and thinking about now, which actually, you mentioned fantasy earlier, but actually, to be fair, science fiction as a genre actually does that a lot. It takes science fiction, the old truism is science fiction is not so much about the future, it's actually about the present. It's about extrapolating what our fears are about the present. So AI is such a prevalent thing. Came in really, we started to discuss it seriously, I think, in terms of the popular culture from about early 2023 onwards. And that's roughly from when Russell T Davies would be writing that episode. So he's very much putting in something about AI. But of course, as the episode unfolds, we realize the AI generator, which is on the device which encases the villain of the piece, doesn't mean AI, it means AL generator. So it was actually a mistake. And of course, this touches on probably what's the most controversial aspect of this episode in terms of current fears that we have. Is not so much about AI, but this idea of toxic masculinity and incels. So there's actually a line in the episode where it turns out that the villain is this white male geek who turns out to be a bit of an incel, aversive control, and so on. So definitely in terms of the press and certain reactions from the fan community, it's the incel aspect that's really landed and made it a discussion point.
Maybe possibly potentially because it's the zeitgeist with films like Adolescence, etc. Obviously, we have the start, which is kind of romantic, where they're sitting there next to the stars, and he gives this certificate, and then the scene kind of moves on to him becoming this villain embodied in this almost Dalek uniform, where he want to take control of her, and which it's almost more normally. I don't think Russell is that super political. I think maybe this is more politicized in a regular episode. I think because normally I feel in the past that his writing is almost it's been good, but it's almost a bit soapy, a bit more lighter. How do you feel? Do you think it's a change in his writing?
To a certain extent, you're right. Yes, he came up as a writer in terms of his history. He came up originally writing soap opera. And I think maybe what you're touching on, Charlotte, is the fact that in the early episodes of the Christopher Eccleston era of Doctor Who, there was a kind of soap-like quality as you went back. For the first time, we explored the companion's family and her relationships, and as well as actually the adventures with the Doctor. But Russell T Davies actually has a very strong political quality, and it's coming out more and more actually in his writing. I've written a piece, somebody who's interested can find online. I wrote it back in 2009 when his serial Years and Years was transmitted by the BBC. Now, this is probably not that well known now or remembered, but it was a kind of very political drama which unfolded over 6 episodes, imagining a sort of dystopian Britain in the coming 15 years. When I say dystopian, a very dark vision of the future. So Russell T Davies does bring in political points, but as a showrunner of Doctor Who, he does it in a very light way. So he will make some very broad brush points within an overarching entertainment. So if we compare the incel plot point in this episode of Doctor Who, it's light years away, to pardon the space pun, from Adolescence. Both are dealing with the same issue. Obviously, Doctor Who can't produce a depressing drama, so it has to be light and quite airy. But it has provoked a bit of a reaction amongst certain elements of the fan base. One wonders, we see a lot of online comment, and one wonders how representative that is of the actual audience. But there has been a bit of chatter saying this is an attack on the white male. But let's not go into the rights and wrongs of that.
Yeah, because the other thing I wondered about this episode, which I couldn't detect myself, but did you see any echoes from earlier episodes? Is it sort of, would you say it's a standalone episode, or does it have things that you as a Doctor Who fan, or you would have known that something they mentioned? And it was interesting with Sasha 55, maybe she has been in the previous, was there anything in the episode you discovered that could have been linked up to the histories?
Well, the thing about both Russell T Davies as a showrunner and actually all the previous showrunners of New Who, so that's Stephen Moffat and Chris Chibnall, they're all immersed in the history of Doctor Who. So they know their episodes going right back to 1963. If they haven't seen them all, because some of them don't exist anymore, they'll have read the scripts of the novelizations and so on. So there's always callbacks to previous episodes of Doctor Who. Funnily enough, one of the things that's maybe not been discussed I've seen in commentary. Tom Baker's introduction to the Doctor way back in December 1974 was in an episode or a four-part story called Robot. And Robot goes on the loose. And a little bit in the design, if you look at that representation, the old episodes on BBC iPlayer, it looks so clunky and so dated. But interestingly, they went for a kind of clunky, dated look for these robots in the Robot Revolution.
Yeah.
It isn't the first time, therefore, that the history of
Or almost
Doctor Who,
toy.
almost toy-based. I believe the design was a reference back as well to classic 50s science fiction, like Forbidden Planet, the movie Forbidden Planet, and particularly the robot character, which was called Robbie the Robot, later to be resurrected for trivia fans in Lost in Space in the 1960s. So there's definitely a Robbie the Robot feel to this robots in Doctor Who, but I do wonder whether there's also maybe a little design reference back to Tom Baker's first episode, The Doctor.
If now move away from this episode and think of Doctor Who in general, so what gives Doctor Who its staying power as this cultural phenomenon? Well, why do you think it's been on now for 60 years? Why do you think it's still relevant? Why do you think these fans come back and back after more episodes? What is it you think the series has? What contributes to its
staying power? Well, important little sort of qualification there. Doctor Who hasn't been on continuously for 60 years, but it's been a presence in the culture for 60 years for sure. But in the original run of Doctor Who's 1963 to 1989. Then there was a one-off TV movie in 1996, which was a sort of Americanized version that wasn't too successful in ratings terms in America, at least. And then, of course, the New Who that we now know, which has been running continuously since 20 years, since 2005. So Doctor Who is not something that is necessarily with us forever. It could be taking off. And this is what a lot of the discussion and focus amongst the fan communities is just now. Will Doctor Who be renewed? Has it lost its relevance in the culture? Know him as a character, of the Time Lord and the police box, but is it actually as relevant to 2025 as it seemed to have been when it was returned successfully in 2005? Back in 2005, it was clear that Doctor Who was tapping into a huge reserve of nostalgia. People who grew up watching Doctor Who in the 70s and 80s and maybe then had kids could show it to their kids, and it became this kind of family thing. But here we are in 2025 with streaming and sitting in the room watching different, you might not even be watching television.
Yeah.
You mainly aren't. They're watching the streaming, or they're looking at YouTube, or the younger generation, TikTok. Is it still as relevant? Well, the jury's out, I'm afraid.
My final question then, where does Doctor Who sit in the wide landscape of British and global television? So I know that it's been bought by Disney. Do you think that's changed it? Is it still relevant for a British audience, or do you think it's been so global-fied you can't connect? How?
Well, Doctor Who's been here before. I mentioned the 1996 TV movie that was made it was actually made by Fox Network, I believe, in the State, a deal with, I think, Universal. It was going to be shown on the Fox Network, and it so well in America. Doctor Who's definitely up to gear in terms of the co-production deal with Disney. Right now, the BBC controls it as an IP, effectively, an intellectual property. The showrunner is decided by the BBC studio facilities, who's producing it. But there is talk that maybe Disney might want to say, okay, if we renew this, we want to pick the showrunner. We want to pick who the new Doctor is. Disney have had counsel and consultation, but what I understand, they haven't had control. Doctor Who's already changed. I think you can see a clear difference between the new version of Russell T Davies' version of Doctor Who and his original 2005 to 2010 run. is less British. It's more trying to reach out to a global audience. But but it also has to ride that both horses, because it also has to be distinctively British, because that's actually what a global audience respond to, is the Britishness of it, the quaintness of the sort of madman in an old police telephone box riding around time and space. So it has to ride two horses. So it's going to be very interesting at the end of this season whether Doctor Who will be renewed. That will tell us whether
Mhm.
it's still relevant or not.
And finally, something you want to leave a listener with? Is there anything else you want to add you feel could be relevant?
Just say enjoy the season of
Yeah.
Doctor Who. Coming up, I think there's going to be some interesting episodes ahead. People were maybe put off a little bit by the first episode. I would say that is characteristic of the way Russell T Davies has been working. The last episode, the first episode of the last season of Doctor Who, one as it was called Space Babies, that was widely regarded as the worst episode of the run. And in fact, the show got better and better. The plots got more and more interesting. And I'm particularly intrigued about next week's episode, which is released this
Mm.
Saturday, called Lux, where the Doctor and his companion go back to the 1950s, and some sort of scary character, according to the trailers, some cartoon character steps out of the screen. Now that's classic Doctor Who scares. So I would just say, watching Doctor Who, keep faith with it, and let's see where this season goes.
Okay, thank you for listening to us here today on YouTube or on our podcast platforms. And also feel free to follow us on our website. And thank you.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. Thanks. Bye bye.